What if I told you that there is one small group of aliens who fight for the good of every race in the galaxy, even for humans? Today, let's talk about the Tau Empire. Let's break down their communism, which makes them perhaps the only do-gooders in this universe. Why do they, in the absence of a nose, smell things better than humans? How, with such a small population, did they make the most advanced technology in the Warhammer universe? And so on. Once again, we have much to talk about, for fiction is infinite. But for the mind, infinity is not the limit. First, you need to understand the biology of the Tau and their homeworld. It all has to do with how they evolved and how they fight. Tau are typical humanoids. Head, 2 arms, 2 legs. They are distinguished by their grey-blue, dry skin. And when exposed to strong sunlight, spots may appear on their skin. Their homeworld is the planet Tau. In fact, their race and their empire take their names from it. The planet has a hot and arid climate. It consists mostly of savannas and mountain ranges, which determined the structure of the Tau's legs. They are hoofed, although their hands are 4-toed. The analogy is even-toed, like horses or cows. It's comfortable to quickly overcome long distances. But such animals on our planet have peculiarities of vision. For example, their eyes are set on the sides to see the entire periphery in case of predator attack. And so it is here. Tau vision is considered more advanced than that of humans. Their spectrum is wider. They see in ultraviolet and infrared, which could help them both in eating vegetation. Many plants look different under ultraviolet light, and in hunting, to see a predator hiding in the bushes or vice versa to see camouflaged prey in the grass. However, there is a disadvantage. Tau pupils do not dilate, because of which the depth of the image is perceived worse and it is more difficult to focus on objects. In general, it works a little differently. Tau see more but less clearly. All of this puts Tau very much in line with herbivorous animals. This is also indicated by their habitual diet. They don't eat animal flesh, mostly vegetables and fruit, which is also a good fit for even-toed. Also interesting is their sense of smell. They do not have a nose, but they do have a sense of smell. The olfactory organs are located inside the mouth. And the most interesting of all, strength and reproduction. On this planet, gravity is a bit lower than on Earth, so Tau have developed physically a bit weaker than humans. They didn't play with genetics, so they don't have anything like space marines, which is naturally important in this world. But about reproduction, see that cleft on their foreheads? It's still not clear exactly what kind of hole it is, or if it's a hole at all, and not much is known about reproduction. First of all, they are viviparous, but how they nurture the babies is unknown, especially considering that we have seen only one representative of the race, and that exclusively in armor. So neither how they feed nor how many babies they give birth to at a time is not clear. Only according to some rumors, the carrying takes place over a couple of months. And it fits well with the fact that the Tau grow quite fast and yet have a relatively short lifespan, about 50 years on average, which could help them evolve quickly and populate other planets. But they're hampered by their own dogma. In general, the world of the Tau holds many mysteries and secrets. Now, about their history. The race gradually evolved, gained intelligence and spread across the planet, but they found themselves in different habitats and spread out into what are known as castes. For example, the fire caste is located in the hot prairies, and these guys consist mainly of warriors. They are the strongest and toughest representatives of the race, and therefore, in height and strength indicators, will not be inferior to humans. There is the earth caste, which has occupied mostly fertile land. They are mostly builders and engineers who erect massive fortified cities and grow food in the fields. There are the water caste. These are mostly traders and diplomats who travel and establish contacts with other castes along their rivers. And naturally, trade and favorable relationships are made along these rivers and seas. The last are the air caste, the representatives of which are the tallest among the Tau. In ancient times they had membranes between their limbs which enabled them to glide through the air, and their bones were hollow and light. However, this has gone away over time. Just such biological adaptations are possible, in my opinion, because Tau give birth quickly and don't live long. The evolutionary process is much faster than ours. In the future, The air caste will be responsible for the space fleet and aviation. Thanks to their structure, they can perfectly withstand strong overloads, and their eyes are able to perceive the depth of the image better than other Tau. In short, as you can see, the castes could differ quite a bit in structure and activity. The society was very rigidly divided and, of course, feuding. The different castes fought and were ready to destroy each other or defend themselves with huge walls and never meet the other castes. This period in their history is called Monto, fragmentation and hostility towards each other. But it couldn't last forever, and Montau ended with the arrival of a higher caste, the ethereal. These guys showed up abruptly and unexpectedly, just during another siege of Earth Caste City by Fire Caste's warriors. The Earth Caste had excellent fortifications, high walls and cannons, so the fortress could not be stormed. But because of the siege, the food in the city was starting to run out and the people were starving, and already diseases were beginning to spread. That's when Ethereal showed up. They managed to bring the representatives of both castes to the negotiating table. Ethereal offered them the idea of a greater good for all, to which the other castes agreed. From that moment on, the race began to unite under the idea of the greater good. However, the caste system remained and was quite rigid. For example, it was impossible to switch from one caste to another. It was also strictly forbidden to reproduce outside of one's caste. That is, a fire caste warrior could only mate with another member of his own caste. Nevertheless, after these events, the race began to develop rapidly. Their duties were strictly divided. One caste was in charge of resource production, construction and so on. The other was in charge of supply, transporting those very resources along the rivers. The third guarded it all, and the empire grew in harmony and prosperity. But the trick is that science at them did not stand still at all, and just as rapidly went forward, all thanks to the greater good. But what is that? The greater good, or Tauva, is a common religious and philosophical concept. According to it, all sentient beings should strive to provide the greatest good for all other sentient beings in the galaxy. And the Tau and their castes aim to spread their religion, to move their society towards successful, peaceful coexistence with others without internecine warfare and conflict. That is why they fight and fight, not to conquer others or to gain more territory. They don't really need that. They do it to bring their ideology to other races. When encountering intelligent species, Tau first try to make diplomatic friends and tell possible future comrades of the greater good. By the way, there's a reason I said comrades. Tau is often compared to communists or socialists. Thanks to their diplomacy, the Tau have quite a few allies among the various races that inhabit the space nearest to them. For example, the Kroot. Although they are in many ways more like savages and even use conventional firearms, the guys are very useful in battle, disguising themselves and delivering very unexpected blows to the most painful places of the enemy. Or the Vespid, which are flying insectoids, very mobile, fast, which is their main strength, which fits perfectly into Tau's logic. The standard Necrons, Orcs, Asuryani and Tyrannids are not allied with the Tau, although there were attempts to negotiate, of course. Tau have tried to communicate with Orcs, for example, in response to which they received a natural crump. They even tried to make friends with Tyrannids, which of course did not end well either. Imperium of Man globally didn't make contact either. The first encounter with humans could have been Tau's last. The interesting story is that the Tau were discovered as an intelligent species in the 35th millennium. That's when the Exploratus fleet of Adeptus Mechanicus discovered the young race. At that time, the Tau were at a Stone Age level of development. Naturally, they were destined for annihilation, because a good Xenos is a dead Xenos. But they were very lucky. A warp storm formed around the system that prevented the Imperium from approaching Tau. And then everyone just forgot about these then primitive Xenos. But the race evolved very quickly and in 5,000 years made significant advances in technology, so by the 40th millennium they appeared as a new threat to the integrity of the Imperium of Man. Unlike the other races, the Tau had not had much trouble in 5,000 years. They were not threatened by short lifespans and radiation from their own sun, and their people were not dying in internecine dynastic wars like the Necrons. They had not yet reached the high level of hedonism that the Ildar had, and they could not be the cause of a new chaos deity because of their biology. Besides, their ideology was about something else entirely, not personal pleasure, but the common good. So everyone was working together. Naturally, under such paradisiacal conditions, catching up with the technological development of modern races would not be so difficult, especially given the lack of a machine uprising and her war with the Iron Men, as humans once had with artificial intelligence. So the Tau began to develop rapidly, as they were not limited by anything and used anything that could advance their society and the greater good. So AI was used everywhere, from regular computers to entire drones that performed a variety of tasks. That's why artificial intelligence in general is such a significant feature of Tau, for in the same Imperium, AI is not used, it's just banned as dangerous. Tyrannids use their own bodies for that, evolved. Orcs don't need AI at all. Why do they need some smart banks for the cramp when you can tap the enemy yourself? Of the more ubiquitous use of AI, I can think of only the Necrons. But they use such an analogue of canoptek design. They are just about the most advanced in the galaxy and probably the only ones with some sort of AI analogue. So Tau can be said to be ahead of most of Warhammer in that regard. Most drones are disc-shaped and have anti-gravity generators that allow them to hover above the ground. The AI in the drones is pretty basic, something on the level of an animal that can act within certain commands. The drones themselves are programmed for self-preservation if it does not contradict the original command. And in case of danger, they try to hide if they have such an opportunity. Stationary drones are programmed to self-destruct when capturing enemies. Tasks that can be performed by drones are absolutely any kind of tasks, from household tricks to agricultural ones. For example, the Earthcast's drone facilitates the construction of buildings and has a number of engineering tools. And of course, there are combat drones, whose task is to protect their units on the field of armor or to fire at the enemy. And even among combat drones, there is a huge variety of them. Pistol drones with light weapons, artillery drones, drones with rocket launchers, fighter drones, mine drones, and there are many of them. The only thing more varied is the Orcs' squigs. Such widespread use of drones is logical. Tau may use manpower, but with the same drones in the army, risks and casualties can be minimized. And Tau are very economical with their fighters. We'll talk more about that. Also, this variety of drones is necessary for the two military doctrines, Montko and Koyon. The main point is that by nature, Tau don't like close combat and protracted conflict. You know, when opponents are just butchering each other, which is probably a sin of every race in Warhammer. Tau try to act quickly and efficiently. The thing is that they don't have a lot of territories, so they don't have a lot of warriors either. That's why they need to take care of their troops. They don't need reckless actions on the battlefield. The Imperium of Man has millions of systems with billions of inhabitants. You can get them all into the Imperial Guard and still have 10 more of them left. And we're not talking about the Space Marines, mechanics and fleet. Tyrannids also pelt the enemy with biomass in huge quantities. It's kind of their tactic in general, and then they devour both outsiders and their own to process into biomass and make new Tyrannids. Orcs also like to pile on the numbers. The more greens and enemies, the cooler the crump. And in general, they grow like mushrooms, you know. Tau aren't like that at all. There aren't many of them. Why? We'll talk about that later. So they have developed two of the most effective war tactics. The first is Montko. Translated into our language, it means death blow. Montko is a carefully planned massive attack on enemy positions which should in the shortest possible time cause maximum damage with minimal casualties for Tau. Critical enemy points or defenses are selected for attack. Breaking through such positions will allow the enemy to be dispersed, suppressed, and the remnants easily destroyed. If from the first moments they fail to inflict significant damage and break through the enemy's defenses, the Tau simply retreat and prepare for another such attack. Koyon is a patient hunter's tactic. The enemy is lured into a trap by literally anything. Tau pretend to retreat, or they make the force units of the enemies who have gone too far to call for help. As soon as the enemy walks into a prepared trap, it collapses. Fast as well as long-range Tau units attack the enemy and destroy it. Naturally, to start such operations, it is necessary to be well prepared and thoroughly scout the situation, extract information, learn the location of the enemy and the direction of his movements. Therefore, very many units are aimed precisely at reconnaissance or stealthy infiltration. The most basic unit is the Tau Pathfinder team, or simply Pathfinders. They are ordinary scouts who try not to engage in combat but to find out any information. Where are the commanders, troop strength, fortification systems and so on? Basically, nothing unusual. They have lighter equipment and armament than the others. One thing that is unusual is the guidance markers. This is a marker light that marks the target and helps other units to fire more accurately at the illuminated target. It makes it easier for homing missile launchers to aim themselves. But the Tau has more than just trivial scouts. In the Firecast, stealth battlesuits are extremely common. There are 4 types of stealth battlesuits. The most basic is the XV-15. In size, it does not differ from the usual Firecast warrior, taking into account the more massive equipment of the scout. Their main feature is the cloaking system. It works by emitters located throughout the suit. They generate a holographic field and work in 2 modes. The first is passive, in which the systems do not operate at full capacity. The suit's magnetic signatures are muted, making XV-15 virtually impossible to detect with various scanners. In active mode, the generators are turned on at full power and generate a field around the wearer. The suit's image is blurred, and the fighter practically merges with the terrain. Stealth battlesuit not only becomes invisible, but also jams enemy signals, creating interference and suppressing the enemy's sensor devices. Of course, if your sensors suddenly failed, you can guess that these guys are nearby, but it becomes much harder to detect them. And similar technology is on all subsequent models. On the more advanced 25th model, which gradually replaces the 15th, on the prototype 22nd, and on the largest stealth battlesuits, 15th 95 Ghost Reel. It's significantly larger, and you could say it's practically a mech rather than a suit. It's about 3 times taller than the previous suits, but despite its size, the stealth system works perfectly well on it, and even on flat terrain it is extremely hard to detect. However, its task includes not only reconnaissance, but also heavy short strikes to the rear of the enemy. The size of battlesuits allows to carry heavy weapons. All of these stealth approaches are characteristic of Tau and their ideals. Why waste valuable resources and sacrifice fighters? After all, you can scout out information and find out that the enemy is vastly outnumbered. Then it will be easier to retreat or lure him into a trap, or vice versa. If you have enough forces, you can strike one powerful blow at once. Or you can use your mobility to do a little damage, then retreat, then attack again, and so on. In short, guys try to minimize losses as much as possible and achieve the greatest success. In other words, everything is also the greater good, only in military terms. Their task is to wage wars in a civilized and deliberate manner, unlike in the Imperium, where often a guardsman's life is worthless and they are thrown into the enemy like meat until the enemy gets tired of repelling endless attacks. So the Tau fight quite differently from all the other races. They are not particularly violent at all. The main thing is the result, not just victory. That's why good intelligence is essential. When the plan of action is ready, all units are put into action. Here, Tau uses everything. Both Firecast infantry forces, various battlesuits and tanks and aviation, of course. The Firecast warrior is clad in standard Tau infantry armor. The material of the outer layer of the armor is known as phiotuc. It's a hard, ultra-dense, nanocrystalline metal alloy. It is used in the armor of most Tau units. The material is lightweight and quite strong. Phiotuc is very resilient to penetration by kinetic strikes or directed energy due to its impact-resistant structure. This material is highly resistant to corrosion by various toxins and other environmental influences, and is more lightweight than conventional Imperial materials which serve a similar structural function, such as plasteel. So much so, in fact, that it surpasses its Imperial counterparts in the type of reinforced steel used by the Imperial Guard. The inner layer of the Firecast warrior's armor consists of an energy pad that absorbs kinetic energy to prevent injury from high-velocity impacts. However, it's not an ultimatum armor. As a mass-produced piece of equipment for regular forces, it's a great piece. It protects a bit better than the regular guardsman armor and is much more comfortable than it. But it is certainly not comparable to the same Space Marines armor. Moreover, the armor is not designed for prolonged exposure to fire at all. Again, Tau values its fighters. Accordingly, fire warriors try to keep their distance from the enemy and shoot the enemy before he approaches, which is aided by the pulse rifle, a basic standard weapon for Tau warriors that is used everywhere. In essence, the pulse weapon is such a part of the plasma weapon. It works on the principle of induction fields that launch micro-explosions of plasma over long distances. Pulse rifles are used primarily against enemy infantry. For the most part, they are much less powerful compared to the more familiar Imperium of man plasma weapons, but at the same time, they are much more stable. While the pulse weapon does not easily penetrate power armor, it also has no risk of exploding in your hands. Imperial analogues, I remind you, are quite unstable and can take away a fighter's arms, if not life, then at least hands. Tau does not need such a thing, and it is better to stabilize the weapon's operation in favor of reliability. Due to their technological sophistication, pulse rifles can be called almost the best basic weapon in comparison with other races of the galaxy. It's powerful, it shoots far, and it's reliable. In other words, it is superior to both lasgun and Orc's shooter, as well as the usual shuriken weapon Eldari. In addition to pulse rifles against infantry, Tau also has railguns. You know how they work. Thanks to the magnetic relay, the projectile accelerates to wild speeds and then flies into the target. And if it doesn't penetrate it through, then due to the sudden pressure surge, it turns all the living matter inside into mush. Even the superhuman physiology of Astartes, along with power armor, cannot withstand a shot from gunships of Tau. Naturally, fire warriors have the smallest weapon in their armament. Much larger railguns are mounted on all sorts of vehicles and battlesuits to destroy enemy heavy equipment. And the third of the common Tau guns is the ion weapons. They are capable of hitting enemies at great distances with streams of ions, which is a major plus for Tau, because the range of fire is much more important, so that again the enemy simply could not approach. It works like this. High-energy particles are accelerated by electromagnetic field and hitting the target, react with materials, transferring huge energy at the atomic level, which causes an explosion. As a result, ion weapons perfectly hit both flesh and metal. They are often mounted on vehicles or heavy combat suits. The regular Tau tanks are, unfortunately, nothing particularly noteworthy. They all share a similar platform based on the TY-7 Devilfish. It is itself a transport with two powerful jet engines and a streamlined shape. This makes it extremely fast on the battlefield. It can also be equipped with a rocket launcher or a heavy railgun, depending on the need. But the most interesting thing, of course, is the battlesuit, which are super diverse in Tau. They fall into three categories: small, medium, and heavy. Small battlesuits are all the stealth scouts we've already listed. Medium battlesuits are the mobile, fast units. Heavy battlesuits are real walking fortresses for breaking through defensive lines or for defense. The medium and heavy models also start with XV, which by the way is a purely human term. It originated during the Tau interrogations. They called their suits Her Exfer, which translates as Mantle of the Hero. Actually, it's all shortened for the more familiar XV to our language. So, all medium battlesuits basically come from the XV-8 Crisis battlesuit. A small one-man battlesuit that is the golden mean of all middles. It's super customizable, and basically any weapon can be mounted on it. At the same time, it's very fast and fairly protected. Only twice the size of the Fire Warrior, with armor thick enough to match the ceramite of the Space Marines' power armor. On top of that, the X-Team is also considerably lighter. Most models are equipped with jet packs, jump packs that have both a jet engine and anti-gravity. Therefore, the department of such suits quickly overcomes the distance to the enemy and strikes in the rear. Or, on the contrary, overcoming an obstacle avoids a close encounter with the enemy. It's a very rugged and super mobile thing that you can put anything you want on it. You want 2 pulse machine guns called burst cannon? You're welcome. You can put an ion cannon to deal damage to enemy heavy infantry and vehicles. And to keep them from getting close to you, put a flamethrower in the second hand. Add some support devices like a super targeting system, stimulant injectors that give the pilot first aid and provide anesthetics and doping. Throw on top of that something like a shield generator, further increasing your defense. Naturally, you can't put everything on the car. You'll have to choose and fine-tune all this stuff. But nevertheless, it is a super versatile and effective thing. Most models are equipped with jet packs, jump packs that have both a jet engine and anti-gravity. Therefore, the department of such suits quickly overcomes the distance to the enemy and strikes in the rear. Or, on the contrary, overcoming an obstacle avoids a close encounter with the enemy. It's a very rugged and super mobile thing that you can put anything you want on it. You want 2 pulse machine guns called burst cannon? You're welcome. You can put an ion cannon to deal damage to enemy heavy infantry and vehicles. And to keep them from getting close to you, put a flamethrower in the second hand. Add some support devices like a super targeting system, stimulant injectors that give the pilot first aid and provide anesthetics and doping. Throw on top of that something like a shield generator, further increasing your defense. Naturally, you can't put everything on the car. You'll have to choose and fine-tune all this stuff. But nevertheless, it is a super versatile and effective thing. In addition to the medium-sized battlesuits, Tau has some big ones. The most famous are 2. The first is the XV-104 Riptide battlesuit. It is a very logical continuation of the previous Crisis suit. It is twice as big and sturdier, but still as mobile and deadly, albeit having lost a bit of its versatility. Well, the second of the most famous is the KV-128 Storm Surge. Storm Surge is a real battle fortress designed specifically for fighting against enemy titans. It carries everything big and powerful to crush the biggest and most dangerous enemy vehicles. It carries a giant pulse cannon, the small analogue of which is used by the Fire Warriors. Its size pushes its power to the limit, and thanks to that it fires huge plasma blasts. Storm Surge itself is suitable for both offensive and defensive use because of its size and power. He goes on the attack without shying away from anything. If they hit him the first couple times, he'll see where it came from and finish them off from above. So he breaks through the defensive line. On the other hand, if he's defending some territory, the same thing happens here. They shoot at him once, he sees where it came from, and responds with all his might. In any case, we've already noticed more than once that Tau emphasize a quick and powerful strike, trying not to prolong the conflict and not to let the enemy get close to them. It's easier for them to destroy all Xenos from a distance. All the equipment is designed for wild mobility, to attack quickly and be able to just as quickly retreat, and no terrain will not interfere with them. Most of the equipment either flies or is capable of wild jumps thanks to satchels. And moreover, Tau will know all terrain conditions perfectly well thanks to their invisible scouts and drones. The logic behind choosing such tactics has 2 key points: strength and quantity. First, about strength. Take a look at Tau's opponents. The Imperial Guard will go bayoneting, and not only will they be a little stronger than the average Tau, but they will simply crush them with meat. That's where flamethrowers can help. But if Space Marines go at them? When this power armor-clad giant gets to Tau, it will kill dozens of Fire Warriors with its bare hands. And they've got the right weapons in their hands too. Only Battlesuit can save the day. It's the same with the Orcs. They love to fight, so they'll chop them to pieces. Necrons are invincible Iron Warriors. What can you do against them in close combat? The same Genestealers can easily tear Space Marine apart. Tau, of course, has allies, the same Kroot, who can still somehow cope in close combat, but rather they will just restrain the enemy and not at the same level. So Tau simply have no choice but to fight at long range, which, by the way, they successfully do. After all, during their wars they managed to break through the Imperial forces, and one commander called Farsight is very experienced in battles with Orcs. But if the Tau's war tactics are so effective, along with their superior technology, ruggedized battlesuits, weapons and cool stealth, why haven't they won yet? The problem here is also one of numbers. The Tau are small in numbers, and the answer to this problem lies in their spaceships. The Tau space fleet is divided into two types, the merchant fleet and the defense fleet. All of the Empire's ships are as technologically advanced as the ground forces. Different ion cannons, armor and shields, nothing new here. But the engines that the spaceships use are another matter entirely. Originally, Tau spaceships used special engines that allowed them to reach near light speed. But that's not enough for fast travel across the galaxy. That was the primary reason for the slow expansion. The Tau were able to reach the nearest space, get to know some of the races that lived nearby, and greatly expand their territories, but only in comparison to their original holdings, which only touched their home system. Distant flights and the scale of the Imperium and all others were out of the question. Here I must return a bit to their biology and talk about one nuance I've been silent on. Tau are insensitive to the warp. Let me remind you, the warp is an alternate reality with its own laws of physics that are highly unstable and subject to change. The passage of time, its flow, and so on. The distance travelled by a spaceship in the warp can be much greater. Or, on the contrary, less than it really is. That's how everyone else travels. The spaceship dips into a warp navigator which is sensitive to warp, sees the most optimal path, and flying a short distance, as if from Earth to the Moon they take off in another star system that may be millions of light years away. So the Tau are unable to interact with the warp. They can't sense it, they can't see it, they can't navigate it. No, of course, if some psyker decides to use warp to send lightning or explosions at Tau will naturally be torn to shreds, but they can never do that themselves. So the Tau Empire within Warhammer is a pretty big word, because the Tau territories themselves are extremely small. Actually, that's why Tau resource in their empire is extremely important, and they don't want to suffer any losses. Unlike the Imperium, recruiting new fighters is not so easy for them. And when humans can go to one of their worlds with a population in the billions, gather a few million fighters, and then repeat this procedure in tens of thousands of other systems, for Tau it is an unacceptable luxury. They simply do not possess such resources and territories, and accordingly they must win on the battlefield not by quantity, but by quality and cunning. That's why they need all these super technological suits that won't suffer much in battle and will leave the pilot unharmed and inflict more damage. The Tau are a very small race, and even having other races helping them doesn't save them. Here we can see an analogy to the East and Japan in particular, which were clearly inspired when creating the Tau Empire. Japan itself is located on small islands. It has little territory and needs to expand into the depths, developing more advanced technology. Recently, Tau have found a small way out of their situation. They have made their warp engine, but since they are unable to navigate it, they use it in a slightly different way. The ship does not fully enter the warp, but only partially sinks into it, as if it were between our world and the warp. But the ship can't stay in this state for long, and it's kind of pushed back out. Because of what the ship flies out with such force that it even overcomes the speed of light, by analogy with a balloon which is submerged underwater, and it, with force, comes back up. With such small dips and leaps, Tau have learned to travel much longer distances than before, but it's still not enough and doesn't compare to full-blown warp engines. What kind of race do we have? The Tau have embraced a partially Eastern flavor, are super technologically advanced, and strive to bring the highest good to all races in the galaxy. And those aren't just words. In addition to the original allied races that the Tau have taken under their wing, the Kroot and Vespid and many more, the Tau welcome the same humans. In most cases, if the Firecast manages to surround Imperial Guard forces or capture fighters, the Tau offer them the opportunity to accept the greater good and become part of their community. And people can keep their beliefs and continue to pray to their god. Many of them may even continue to fight, well, only on the side of the Firecast. These people are called Gwevesa, which literally means human helper. Many Gwevesa now fight alongside the warriors of the Tau Firecast on behalf of the greater good as what are known as Gwevesa auxiliaries. They even take up arms when required against their fellow humans of the Imperium of Man. The same Space Marines will never join the Xenos because of their physiology and psychobabble. At least no such cases have been observed. Ordinary people in Tao society can choose their own destiny. You want to go to the frontier of their empire, they'll supply you with all the advanced technology you need to survive. You want to trade? Fly all over the empire and bring prosperity. And if you want to fight, you'll be equipped with their advanced pulse rifles and sent on missions with the Firecast. Except for battlesuit, which is an honor worthy of only a select few warriors. But is there even one faction in the world of Warhammer that doesn't try to destroy, devour, capture and exterminate all those who are different from themselves? Didn't you find some of the moments a bit odd in their empire? For example, why was the infighting over so quickly in the beginning when the ethereal appeared? And all as one Tau embraced the greater good? No resistance, a utopia where everyone helps each other, even though they had recently been fighting and killing each other. And why is it that only the Tau, unlike the others, are welcoming of other races? It can't be that rosy in Warhammer, not even a little bit. To answer such questions, we need to look at these ethereal. For the most part, their biology is similar to other Tau representatives. However, somehow they manage to almost completely control the behavior of their kin, forcing them to voluntarily obey and follow any commands. For example, sometimes ethereal representatives go into battle leading again the Firecast. This greatly inspires the fighters, and they fight more effectively, but it has the opposite effect. If the ethereal is killed, the rest of the Tau will lose effectiveness in combat, become despondent, and some may go into uncontrollable battle rages. Which is interesting because the Tau look like peacemakers, who are primarily trying to negotiate rather than kill someone. And this sudden, violent aggression. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why the Tau are not allowed to use close combat, because then their beastly, barbaric nature can manifest itself. Nevertheless, this is one example of the ethereal's complete control of their own race. This is how they managed to end the very conflict in ancient times. How they do this is not entirely clear. It was originally suggested that the ethereal control the others with certain pheromones, including perhaps the cleft in their heads was involved. However, it seems to me a more beautiful version that these pheromones are perceived in the same way as we are, by means of odours, and the olfactory system of Tau is located in the mouth. And accordingly, when they communicate, talk, they just can't help but get a dose of pheromones and kind of listen with open mouth. Such a beautiful analogy in my opinion. It was also assumed that ethereal were possessed with some kind of psychic powers, but nevertheless Imperium of Man, of course, captured ethereal, conducted different autopsies and still didn't confirm anything. The mystery of the ethereal remains unsolved. Nevertheless, such an impact is a fact. Another example is Commander Farsight, whom I have already mentioned. He was once a hero of the Tau Empire, fought many battles, won them all, of course, and was eventually hailed as almost a folk hero. But as he continued to fight and lose his loyal fighters, a chasm began to grow between him and ethereal. At some point, the ethereal sensed a great deal of confusion in Farsight and were about to remove him from command or send him into retirement. But just then, Farsight was on a military campaign to exterminate his unloved orcs, and a strange thing happened. On one of the planets, an obscure enemy that was unlike anything Tau had seen before appeared abruptly. It attacked sharply, most likely targeting ethereal, because after reaching its goal and killing all ethereal, the enemy abruptly retreated. Farsight, together with his companions, had to report the incident immediately, waiting for further instructions, but no messages came. So, sitting without ethereal, Farsight's consciousness gradually seemed to wake up. He thought more and more about the situations from the past and realized how unquestioningly Tau carried out ethereal's actions. Farsight realized that ethereal was somehow manipulating Tau and further organized his enclave in a region forbidden to Tau, from where he would try to bring good to his people without ethereal influence. And it's really quite a fascinating thing. Ethereal have such a strong influence over his fighters that Tau would not hesitate to kill himself at the First Order if told to do so. Ethereal still maintain a medieval caste system, where one is not allowed to breed outside of their caste. It's basically pure eugenics. Firecast soldiers are extremely strong and hardy, So let them mate with other soldiers like them, so that the offspring get stronger and they don't lose their strong genes. But even within their own caste, after two members of, for example, fire decide to have a child, they are given a short leave of absence to make the child provide initial care, after which at an early age it will be taken away for further training and education, and the parents will be sent back to their place of service. And it doesn't matter what it is, some serious military facility or a retail outlet. That is, they are almost literally bred like rabbits, controlling breeding and education. Such a communist utopia. It feels like the ethereal view their race as expendable. If they urgently need resources, they simply initiate a decree of free labor and relocate all the necessary population to wherever it was needed. Fields, mines or factories you don't get to choose, but you'll be obliged to gladly accept. Their greater good is nothing more than a cheating. In fact, when you encounter aliens, if they are not willing to accept the highest good, Firecast destroys those who disagree. So either you're with us or you're dead. And those races that did comply were severely restricted. They weren't given all the technology the Tau possessed, just the basic ones necessary for survival. The same battlesuits used the Tau exclusively. Humans and others were not allowed to pilot them. And in general, the Tau tried to control the human population by secretly sterilizing them and preventing them from growing beyond a certain number. The Tau tried to brainwash them to wean them away from faith in the Emperor and instill a higher good and his ideals. Plus, there's all sorts of rumors about brainwashing with different helmets. Like, here's some translation stuff to help you communicate better. Oh, you're suddenly loyal. It's all about communication. Naturally, there were dissenters among the same people, but they were just quietly executed. Unlike the Imperium, such cases were kept quiet and hidden. Ethereal in principle very often conceal, deceive or hide something. For example, the faction has one official leader, Supreme Ethereal Aunva, and he is long dead. The assassin of Imperium of Man was able to get to their ringleader and kill him in his personal bunker. But in order not to sow panic, Tao simply projected a hologram of him and the Ethereal speak on his behalf, keeping the people in the dark, and that's the way it's always been. Another example, they test a new warp engine, something goes wrong and it explodes. Everything will be faked with holographic recordings, artificial intelligence generates the right videos. So the Tau are not as good guys as you might think at the beginning. They're just like everyone else, pursuing their own ambitions and achieving their own goals in any way they can. It's just that they do it in a less overt way and cover themselves with some kind of ideals. And in reality they can be much worse, deceiving, hiding their deeds, secretly subjugating their people and controlling other races through propaganda or coercion by force, or literally brainwashing with all sorts of devices. All in all, a typical Warhammer with its hopelessness, misery and perpetual war.